Good evening and welcome to a webinar on the Windrush Scandal. If there's ever been a webinar for a time like this, I think this is it. So we welcome you warmly to this time together. And I promise you, you're in for a real treat. A little bit of housekeeping. If you wish to submit questions to the speaker, I invite you to do so via the Q&A button if you're with us via Zoom and through Facebook, through the usual channels on Facebook. And we will try to get through as many of the questions as possible. No promises, but we will make our best effort. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce to you Patrick Vernon, OBE, who is a social commentator, campaigner, and cultural historian. He has over 20 years senior experience working across mental health, public health, heritage, race equality, and is well known in health, local government, and the voluntary sector. In 2018, he kickstarted the campaign for an amnesty for Windrush Generation. Patrick is currently Associate Director for Connected Communities at the Centre for Aging Better, Equality and Diversity Advisor to Lambeth Council, Chair of Citizens Partnership for Healthcare Investigation Branch, and Senior Associate at OLMEC, I hope I've got that right. Patrick is a patron of the ACCI, a long-established Black mental health charity in Wolverhampton, and patron of Santé, a social enterprise in Camden which supports and befriends refugees and asylum seekers across London. Patrick is also Vice Chair of the Bernie Grant Trust and a board member of 38 Degrees. He received an OBE in 2012 for his work in race equality and health. He was awarded an honorary PhD by Wolverhampton University in 2018 for his campaigning and writing on culture, history, and migration. In 2019, Patrick received the SMK Lifetime Achievement Award for campaigning. We have serious pedigree here today, ladies and gentlemen. Patrick, we warmly welcome you and look forward to what you have to share with us this evening.
Fine. Hi, good evening everyone online, and it's really great to be invited by Churches Together to talk about the Windrush Scandal. And I've got about 20 minutes which I'll explain the Windrush Scandal, why I got involved, what's happening now, and maybe how you can get involved as well. So a little bit about me. Obviously, Rosemary's given me a nice bio. Thank you very much for that. I was born in Wolverhampton, which is important. It was really fantastic because in 2018, the university gave me an honorary degree for my work communities. But my parents, they came from Jamaica, part of the Windrush Generation. They came to Wolverhampton in the late 1950s, and they raised me and my 4 sisters. My parents, touch wood, are still alive. During their late 80s. They're shielding or post-shielding. I don't know what situation around COVID-19 now is, but they're still going strong. But what's happened in Wolverhampton, like other parts of the country, a lot of the Windrush Generation have died, for many years, but particularly in Wolverhampton and in the Black Country in the West Midlands, there's been a high proportion of Windrush Generation and people in the churches. In Wolverhampton, there's been about 4 pastors that have died of COVID-19 in the last few months as well. And I think this is important because I think the Windrush Scandal is really about the current inequalities that we face in society as well. So I grew up in Wolverhampton, and actually I grew up in the church, so basically the Black-led church movement. And ironically, the first established church, Black-led church, a Black majority church in Britain, was established in Wolverhampton by Reverend Oliver Lysite in 1953. And I think it's quite significant of that because many years later, about 5 years ago, I worked with the Lysite family in the New Testament Church of God and the Wolverhampton Civic Society, and we've got a blue plaque to recognise his achievement. And the question is, how many blue plaques are there of black church leaders in Britain who have passed on their ancestors or to heaven? And maybe that's something that you may want to think about recognising that history of people working in mainstream churches as well as the black majority churches as well. So that was my background in many ways, and that's informed me of my work around campaigning, social justice, etc. And how I got involved in the Windrush Scandal wasn't because of the scandal itself. For many years, I've been campaigning for a National Windrush Day, and the reason why I thought this was important was I've been able to capture my parents' oral histories. So I've filmed over the years. I've filmed them, interviewed my parents. So for prosperity's sake, for the family, that's important. Secondly, I've been involved in a number of historical research projects and community projects around the black history of the black community. And I launched my website in 2002 called, which is still going. It's one of the longest established black history websites in the UK. And the reason why I launched that website, because at the time I was working for the NHS as a senior director, and I wanted to put something back in the community. And I was mentoring lots of young black boys, 10-year-olds, 14-year-olds, people lost their jobs, young people. And one of the key things I noticed was that there was a lack of acknowledgement or understanding of our history in Britain. Didn't know much about the history in the Caribbean or Africa, and I didn't know much about the history in Britain. So I had this personal quest whilst I was working as senior director at NHS to try and do something different around history. I had a passion for culture, for black history. I never went to university to study history. I studied law instead, actually. But I had this passion for history. And so I developed this website. And then a year later, I developed another website called 100 Great Black Britons, which was about celebrating 2,000 years of black presence in Britain. And I did that website because the BBC at the time, when they did their 100 Great Britons campaign, did not have one black person or any Asian person or of colour in their campaign when they were celebrating British achievements. Not a lie. They had Freddie Mercury, who was the lead singer of Queen. But if you looked at Freddie Mercury, you wouldn't think he was white anyway, but he was actually of Persian heritage, Farsi heritage, and he was born in Zanzibar. But apart from Freddie Mercury, that was it. There was no person of colour on that list. So I did a counter campaign, which went ballistic, which was quite successful. And that led to the public voting for Mary Seacole as the greatest black Briton in 2004. That led to a number of black nurses to raise money for the Memorial statue, which was unveiled about 4 years ago, which was fantastic in the grounds at St Thomas Hospital. But also that led to start a whole campaign to recognise black British history was important. Mary Seacole was included in national curriculum for the first time, along with Lord Equiano. And so that's been my background leading up to Windrush Scandal. I had a good understanding of black British history, the history of the Caribbean, the history of enslavement. And for many years, I would travel to Africa just to learn the history of Africa. I've been to West Africa, East Africa, just learn about the history and grounding myself, and then using that experience to do loads of workshops on family genealogy, family workshops. I published a book written by Robin Walker called When We Ruled, which was quite important, a seminal book in many ways about African civilization prior to slave trade. So I was immersed in all the different histories of our lived experiences going back thousands of years. And through this process, with a lens to look at the black experience in Britain, there was hardly any acknowledgement of my parents' generation, the Windrush generation. I befriended the elder in Hackney. I live in Hackney. Befriended the elder called Eddie Martin Noble. He wrote a book about his life in 1984 called Jamaican Airman, published by New Beacon Books. And in his book, he talked about the colour bar, the racism, the experience of discrimination he faced when he volunteered for the RAF in 1943, and the experience of the colour bar in Britain in the late 40s, 50s, 60s, till the time of till about his life in general. and I got to know Eddie. We were, in many ways, we had a bond. He had 2 daughters, but he never had a son. And he adopted me like a son, and I didn't really know much of my grandparents because I lived in Jamaica, and most of them had passed away by the time I did go to Jamaica to see them. So we had this special bond, and through this special bond, and I think what church did he go to? He was actually a Christian. He was active Christian as well. I think he might have gone to a Baptist church, and we got to know each other really well. Shared me his life stories, and I said to him one day, Eddie, you've got this fantastic story. He was born, by the way, in 1917 on Valentine's Day, and he told me about the history of Jamaica from a really lived experience of colonial Jamaica in the 1920s and 30s and 40s before he came over to serve in the RAF. Which is quite important to have to understand what Jamaica was like, what the Caribbean was like under colonial rule, basically. And there was a clear racial divide, colour skin, complex divide, class divide, and all that stuff that was there, which in many ways it's still there in Caribbean society, to be quite honest. Anyway, so interviewed Eddie, and it was fantastic, his lived experiences. He passed away in 2007 at the age of 90, died of cancer. Family asked me to do a eulogy at his funeral, and I realised I'd interviewed him. I got lots of film footage about his life, and I decided to make a documentary in 2008. In 2008, it was 60th anniversary of the Windrush Empire Windrush document, Tilbury. 10 years before that, in 1998. That's when the Windrush Foundation was established by Arthur Torrington and the late Sam King, who was a passenger on the Windrush and also served in the RAF during the Second World War. They established the Windrush Foundation to promote the history of the Windrush generation, and particularly the lives of the people that were on the Windrush ship. And they worked with the BBC, they worked with Mike and Joe Phillips. They produced this 4-part TV series about the Windrush, and there's a book that came out of that. But in 2008, by the way, there was no recognition, no TV announcement, nothing at all about acknowledging the Windrush generation. And I did my documentary about Eddie's life, A Charmed Life, which went very well. Did lots of film screenings around the country and also abroad. And then I was asked by The Guardian to have a clip of the film on their website. And they also asked me to write an article about his life. But what I did instead, I wrote an article about Windrush. I wrote this article around about 2009, about 2010. The article's still online, by the way. And I said in my article that in America, we celebrate Martin Luther King Day. In America, they have like the Statue of Liberty, which is about symbolism around migration and America. What do we have in Britain to celebrate the Windrush generation? What do we have in Britain to celebrate multicultural Britain? What do we have in Britain to celebrate migration? And the answer is not much, not very little. And I said in my article, why can't we have a national day, actually even a public holiday called Windrush Day, celebrating the contribution of the Windrush generation to Britain, and also to use the opportunity to celebrate all migrants who've come to Britain since the Second World War. I wrote this article, and actually I got approached by a number of people, and a lot of people, particularly connected with the churches, and the London Baptist Church. One of their members approached me, and basically said, "This is what you're saying, Patrick, is fantastic. Let's work together and see if it's a reality." And then from about 2010-11, every year we would have meetings. We would invite different church leaders. We would go down to Windrush Square in Brixton to acknowledge the Windrush generation and to recognise multicultural Britain. And at the same time, as part of the campaign, which I played a key role in, we tried to lobby, engage with MPs. We had letters in the Times to sort of doing that. We had with the early day motion, and we had a couple of petitions trying to generate interest around Windrush Day. So that was my involvement. And then 2018, when the Windrush scandal broke, that's when people started to take seriously Windrush Day. Prior to then, none of the political parties were interested about Windrush Day, to be quite honest, because I approached all of them. They weren't interested at all. basically. I mean, some MP said to me, Patrick, it's a nice idea, but it'll never happen at all. That was, you know, but I was determined as well. In 2018, in terms of the Windrush Scandal itself, the Windrush Scandal is on it's had different components. The heart of the Windrush Scandal was that in 1948 there was a British Nationality Act that was created, and that act basically meant that anyone from the colonies could come to Britain. This is prior to independence for many countries in Africa and the Caribbean. By then, India and Pakistan already had their independence, but definitely for black countries and other countries, you could come to Britain as a British citizen, because the act extended across the whole of the empire, and people could come here and they could work here, they could vote, they could register to vote, and be treated no differently to any white person in the UK. That was the Nationality Act. The act actually wasn't intended for us. The act was actually intended to attract people from Australia and New Zealand and South Africa to come to Britain, white people, the Dominions countries, because they needed a shortage of labour, and because of the war, because of the Second World War, had a massive impact on cities and manufacturing, and there was a shortage of labour. But actually what happened was a lot of Caribbean people took the advantage of saying, we're going to come over here, and a lot of people from Africa and a lot of people from different parts of the world came during that period. And because, and then the children that came with their parents between the late 40s up to 1973 didn't need to have passports, the children of the Windrush generation. So these are minors under 16 who came on their parents' or uncle's passport, and when they arrived here, they didn't need to have any additional identification. They would naturally assume they were British because of that particular legislation. Then when you roll the clock forward, then you obviously, Enoch Powell in 1968, he made his speech, Rivers of Blood. And his speech, in many ways, created the template for immigration policy, even today. And then, even if we speak today, the current government are still insistent on using a hostile environment policy, which is based on fear and intimidation to discriminate against people of colour regarding their status in Britain. And that is because of Enoch Powell's speech of Rivers of Blood. Ironically, Enoch Powell was MP in Wolverhampton. My parents came to Wolverhampton. And another twist of the tale, he actually opened my junior school when I was about 6 years old in Wolverhampton. Still got the scars, well, not scars, but maybe that's the reason why I'm still doing this. I'm doing this stuff. Didn't know at the time what he was as an individual, but when I found out later on, then maybe that's an extra reason for doing what I'm doing. And then in 2014, the government created a hostile environment policy through the immigration bill, which meant that anyone had to have a passport or some form of or proof of indefinite leave to stay to confirm or to access job opportunities, open bank accounts, anything that we do normally in Britain. You had to have this proof of identity that you were British. But the twist in this was actually how many white people were asked their passports or proof of identity? Probably not many. But how many people of colour were asked for proof of identity in terms of their jobs or access to benefits or access to their state pensions? And that was a lot of us. And the reason why the scandal happened was that the children of the Windrush generation that came to Britain, particularly during the 60s, particularly in 70s, didn't have any passport, didn't have a proof of identity when they arrived in Britain. Most of them came by plane. And a lot of them actually didn't travel, didn't get passports. Not all of them got passports. If they didn't have a passport, it might have expired. And because they didn't have a passport, they were deemed to be illegal immigrants, despite the fact that they were British in the first place. And that's led to a lot of people being deported. And I think the hostile environment happened even before the 2014 Immigration Act, because Wendy Williams, who has done the review on the Windrush Scandal, and actually one of the key things I'd like to recommend anyone is to get a copy of her report, Lessons Learned Review. You can actually download it off the Home Office website or do a Google search, and to read this, because I think the report itself gives a historical analysis of the Windrush Scandal, and in her recommendation, she talks about that this was avoidable because, but the government ignored the advice of Caribbean leaders. They ignored the advice of lawyers and charities and organisations that's been lobbying around the issue of migration rights for many years. The government completely ignored that because they had targets. They had targets because they wanted to get the net migration figure down. And the one way of doing that was to try and deport as many people from Britain. And how many of you can remember vans driving around Britain, those vans saying, go home? Those vans were indiscriminate. They were targeting anyone, they didn't care. You know, I remember seeing those vans driving around Hackney. And I remember taking a picture of it and I tweeted about it about a couple of years ago, about 4 years ago. And these vans were there to create fear and intimidation. If you couldn't prove that you're British, then the fear was that you'd be deported, and the intimidation was that if you felt you weren't British, just leave anyway. And that is a hostile environment in a nutshell. And that hostile environment still exists even today, despite the fact the Windrush Scandal, despite all the apologies done by the government. How I got in aspects of the Windrush Scandal was because I used to be a councillor in Hackney. I was a councillor for about 8 years. And so obviously as a councillor, you do lots of stuff around representing people, advocacy. I stopped being a councillor about 5 or 6 years ago, but people still approach me for doing work in the community around helping their assistance and advice. I got approached by one particular individual who was threatened with deportation. And when I read all his paperwork, by the way, I'm not an immigration lawyer. I mean, I studied law, but I know I'm not an immigration lawyer. But when I studied his paperwork, and also at the same time, Amelia Gentleman in The Guardian was writing a whole range of case studies and articles of individuals who were caught up in this around about November 2017, right up to about, well, even now she's still doing it, But I was approached by one particular individual called Iwaldo Romeo. Actually, his younger brother was Jazzy B from Soul to Soul. But we didn't want to disclose that fact because it'd be all about him, his brother, not about Iwaldo and about his immigration situation. And so he approached me, I looked at his paperwork, and I read all the articles that Amelia had written. I actually contacted Amelia, and I realised that all these articles that she wrote about people losing their jobs, people not accessing cancer treatment, people being deported, not allowed to come back into Britain, the commonality, and it was affecting disproportionately a lot of Caribbean people, as well as a lot of people from Africa. And I recognised that this one wasn't an individual act, because at the time the Home Office was saying that these people, it's just administration problems. And actually, in the community, I remember even on Twitter, and I'm talking to lots of people. There were a lot of people in the community saying, "Oh, these Windrush people, they've messed up. They have not sorted out paperwork." I'm all right, Jack. I sorted out my paperwork when it came to 91, 81, and 88 Immigration Act. I'm all right. And these people, they can't read, they can't write. And actually, we were quite dismissive of what was happening in the early days of how these people were experiencing. Because people thought, well, it's just another overstayers type scenario. But they weren't overstayers, they were already British citizens. So when I did some more research work, I recognised that these were British people of Caribbean heritage, African heritage, all linked to that historic moment of Windrush Generation, where people were invited, or, I mean, you can define what invited means, but basically through the legislation of the 1948 Immigration Act, they came here, not as economic migrants, they came here as British citizens, and that's a fundamental difference. And their rights as British citizens were taken away, basically. So when I recognised that there was a connection between this, I saw this was almost like a class action against Black people. And that's why I launched my petition in March 2018. And I used Iwaldo as a case study to demonstrate that this was clear case of discrimination, and had to be, and I used the word amnesty deliberately because Amnesty, even though they were British already, amnesty evokes an emotional response. If I said we want to, in my petition, which nearly 20,000 people signed, if I said in my petition we want to regulise the status of people who are already British, then people would have said, well, no one would have understood it, and it wouldn't have that emotional impact. And that's, I mean, I'm a campaigner, and if any of you are involved in doing campaigns or developing a campaign at a local level or national level through your work, you have to make it simple. You've got to create a narrative which people could identify with. And I created a narrative that these were the children of the Windrush generation that worked hard, paid their taxes, raised families, and now they were British, and they were denied their status as British, and it was a human rights issue. And that led to a massive chain reaction. That led to a lot of people retweeting, a lot of black celebrities were retweeting my tweets, lots of MPs were retweeting my tweets, particularly David Lammy. And then when I got 100,000 signatures on my petition, which I did on the government website, that would automatically generate a debate in Parliament. But before the debate happened in Parliament, my actual debate because of my petition, that gave the permission for lots of MPs to raise issues in Parliament. And between the period of April 2018 to July 2018, every single day, the word hostile environment, Windrush Generation, Windrush Scandal was trending on Twitter and Instagram throughout the whole 4 months. When I was doing my campaign for many years for Windrush Day, I prayed and wanted that to happen for Windrush Day, but it never happened. But it happened because of the scandal. And when the media got involved, and all the media did stories highlighting the scandal, and it was one of these few moments. If we look back in history, almost very similar to what happened to the murder of Stephen Lawrence, it's one of these moments in history where, irrespective of if you were black, white, irrespective if you were a hardcore Brexiteer or a hardcore communist, everyone understood the message of how the Windrush generation were treated by the government. And it was universal. It was almost like a no-brainer. I can remember getting messages from even UKIP supporters saying, we support the Windrush generation. It's unbelievable, but it was one and the government didn't number one, appreciate that, and they were completely wrong-footed. They did not expect that the great British public would support one of the most toxic issues in Britain when it comes to immigration, nationality. All opinion polls, and even now, a lot of opinion polls say that immigration is the number one issue, and that's why we're leaving Europe, basically. But for that brief moment of time, a lot of people supported the campaign for the Windrush generation and supported the idea of amnesty. And that's the reason why the government, even today, still apologises when they mess up, when there's a story about a Windrush person being treated badly, or the compensation scheme not working effectively, they keep apologising. But how many apologies do we want? We want action. 2 years on, what has happened 2 years on? Well, on a positive note, over 12,000 people have had their status regularised in Britain. But ironically, only about 10 days ago, Dominic Raab, the Foreign Secretary, said that people in Hong Kong will have automatic status. 3 million people in Hong Kong will have automatic status. But yet, why is it that people of the Windrush generation and their children have to go through the degradation of going to the Home Office to still prove that they're British, when people from Hong Kong, just like that, can have their status just like that? There is something fundamentally wrong here. I'm not decrying what's happening in China and people from Hong Kong, but why the government could have done that. The Windrush scandal could have ended 2 years ago if the government had given automatic status to all the Windrushers, just like that. There are still thousands of people who have not come forward to sort out their status because they don't trust the Home Office. The government have got deportation flights around the charter flights. There have been quite a few charter flights over the last couple of years. And on top of that, the compensation scheme that's been developed by the government, which claim is on the basis of righting the wrongs, is based on a fault-based system. People still have to prove that they lost economically, emotionally, financially. And the burden of proof is used in a criminal investigation in criminal court beyond reasonable doubt, which is ridiculous, which means that the government is not serious about tackling the Windrush scandal. So in 2020, as we speak, the Windrush scandal still happens. People are still threatened with deportation. People are stuck in detention centres, not knowing if they're going to be deported or not. Thousands of people have not come forward to sort out the status because they don't trust the Home Office. The government has only given out £1 million in compensation in the last 18 months, and the average claim is less than 5,000, whereas most people have lost their livelihood for less 10 years plus, lost their homes, lost everything, and yet they've been given, more people will get compensation on the Thomas Cook for losing their holiday than the Windrush generation. So these issues are still ongoing. Only 2 weeks ago, I presented a petition with 5 high-profile Windrushers. Anthony Bryant, where the BBC made a drama about his life called Sitting in Limbo. He came to number 10. Paulette Wilson, who had 2 spells of detention in Yarnswood Detention Centre. Walder Romeo came. Glenda Caesar from Hackney came, who had worked for the NHS for many years, lost her job because she couldn't prove that she was British. Michael Breathwaite, a teaching assistant from East Islington, lost his job, even though he'd been in the same job for many years, couldn't prove he was British. We all presented our petition. 150,000 signatures signed our petition, demanding that this report, the lesson report done by Williams, to be fully implemented, because the government had been sent on this report for the last 4 or 5 months. And Priti Patel, a few days later, announced that she would implement that. What I've heard today, she made an announcement today that she's still considering what aspects of the recommendation to implement. She's appointed people to sit on this cross-government review to implement the lessons learned review. And there are some people of faith on that review, which is great. But with all due respect, none of them have not been involved in the Windrush Scandal. None of them have been campaigning for the Windrush Scandal. And actually, some of them believe that the Windrush Scandal was a fault of the Windrushers themselves. So I don't know how effective that review is going to be anyway. And also, people don't believe in structural racism. And the Windrush Scandal is about structural racism. The Windrush Scandal was deliberately engineered to discriminate against people of colour, had a disproportionate impact on black people particularly. It's still happening, and it's no different. And that's the reason why, and the whole issue around Black Lives Matter and COVID-19 is quite critical and quite important. All these are interrelated, and we need to fight structural racism and discrimination. This is the job that you need to do as people of faith. People of faith, to fight for social justice. Some of you are involved in that, and that's fantastic. But we all need to raise our game to fight for social justice, support the victims of the Windrush Scandal, support people being impacted from COVID-19, and to fight and to recognise that Black Lives Matter and wider issues around structural racism in Britain. I think I've gone over 20 minutes, so I'll stop there.
Wow. Thank you so much, Patrick. You've given us so much to think about. And please do, if you haven't submitted a question, please do so. We've already had a number of questions. So if you don't mind, Patrick, I'll start bombarding you.
Sure.
We have had a couple of questions regarding to do with the compensation and action, what people can do. And we have a question from Derek Morgan. Hello, Derek. Thank you for joining us. And his question is very direct. What can the churches do?
It's interesting. The churches can do a lot of stuff. So even now, a lot of people don't have confidence in coming forward to sort out their status. There have been a number of organisations around the country. So in London, you've had Black Culture Archives. In Nottingham, you've got Clive Foster from Pilgrim Church in Nottingham. You've got Desmond Jago, Reverend Desmond Jago in Birmingham. And there are a number of faith leaders organising surgeries, working with lawyers who give pro bono free advice, and they're using their church facilities for people to come down and to either get advice around their legal status in Britain or assistance around the compensation, completing the compensation forms. But if there's an opportunity for faith leaders to approach their local, lawyer, law firm, or lawyers that are happy to work and engage, or advice workers or case workers to do surgeries, That's one thing. Because one of the things that I know, a lot of the people that got caught up in the Windrush Scandal, they're all churchgoers. They're all Christians. And ironically, at the time, the church didn't come forward. I was a bit disappointed. If you want one spin, I was a bit disappointed. The church didn't come forward. And if you compare this to America, it'd be a different ball game. The church would be out there doing stuff. But the churches have been too quiet on this particular issue. As a general, I mean, there have been some fantastic church advocates and leaders, but generally speaking, the church has not raised its game on this particular issue, with a majority of their members and their children of congregations have been caught up in a scandal.
And why do you think that is? Do you think that's something to do with Black majority churches on the whole being discouraged from getting involved in matters of politics, or do you think it's something else?
I mean, it's a good question. I mean, I'm sure you have these debates already. I've had conversations with Richard over the years regarding this. It's difficult because, I mean, yeah, it is political. I mean, you can't avoid it. If you've been told by the government that we're going to deport you because we don't believe that you're British, but you are, it's political. It's only when you challenge the government and the government realizes that they've gone over the line, that's when, and that's what I've been doing. I mean, it's about being an activist and campaigner. Christ was an activist and campaigner, wasn't he? That's what I was taught when I went to Sunday school. He was a campaigner, he was an activist. He spoke out. Ultimately paid the price. And I think sometimes we want the easy life. We don't want to kind of push the boat too much. But this is hostile. The hostile environment is based on, if you watch any film around the mafia, like any Martin Scorsese film, the mafia operates to some of the Home Office. It's based on fear and intimidation, and that's what the government policy was at the time, and still is. It's fear that and intimidation, and we have to challenge that. It's not right. It's ungodly. It's not right. It's ironic because Theresa May, who's a practicing Christian, she sanctioned that policy. On reflection now, she's out of office. She's now speaking up about it again. So it's interesting about how politicians are as well. So I think the church could do more. One thing you can do is, I've got a petition. I'm happy to share the link. I've got a current petition about the Windrush Compensation Scheme. So the Windrush Compensation Scheme was launched April 2019. The whole idea of the scheme, in theory, was to cover all the losses of anyone who was caught up in the Windrush Scandal, basically. And that was the appointed Martin Ford QC, black barrister, who helped to recommend the device scheme, which is fine. And I was very positive about that at the time. I'm now less positive because the way that the Home Office, number one, the Home Office should not be managing the compensation scheme. Because the Home Office currently, and it's in the same directorate, believe it or not, where they do the deportation flights. It's the same directorate that oversees the detention centres. And yet, at the same time, they are meant to be managing a scheme to be empathetic to the victims of the scandal. It doesn't stack up. It's a conflict of interest, and that scheme should be managed arm's length outside of the Home Office, because and it's not working anyway. So my petition, which is on 38 degrees, and I'll share the link, which 55,000 people have signed it so far, is demanding that the compensation scheme is moved out of the Home Office to an independent agency, because the scheme is not working. If you speak to any of the victims of the Windrush Scandal, the way that they have to complete sending information, it was bad enough already in the first place that they have to submit lots of paperwork to demonstrate they're British. They're doing the same thing again to get compensation. It's almost like they've been treated as benefit scroungers. And they were in the wrong. It was the government that was in the wrong. And if using the principles of restorative justice, the government should say, we messed up. We will make it easy for you to pay you for what we've done to you. Because we messed your life up. And on top of that, some of you have died. 5 people, by the way, 5 people have died in the UK. And even today, the estates have not been paid anything at all. It's outrageous. If this is any other community, it'd be like World War. Why are we being treated with so disrespect and degradation? So it'd be really fantastic if people can sign a petition, and if you want to join, if we can get 100,000 signatures, it'd be fantastic if you could all join me and we could take it down to number 10.
Brilliant. Okay, that's the call out there, people. Get onto that petition and get your walking shoes on and take a stroll down to number 10 Downing Street. I'm sure you'd be warmly welcomed. We have a number of questions here, all anonymous, but around this whole issue of the compensation and deportation. Like, how many people, do we know how many people were deported? And how many people on the whole were caught up in the Windrush Scandal? And yeah, I suppose that's quite, that there was another one earlier on here, and where is it? And we said, bear with me. Right, so, you know, it was a question, well, I think you've answered this one. Have the Windrush generation been properly compensated? I think that's a resounding but also, you know, how many people are being deported and how many people are still struggling with this process? Do we have those figures at all?
The answer is we don't know. That's a problem.
Right.
So in the early days of the Windrush Scandal, the government did bring back some people from the Caribbean. About a couple of people, they paid for their ticket, brought them back. But that was, I think it was more of a PR stunt because because the government was on the back foot. It was like embarrassment, and so they had to do something. But they've not brought anyone back from Africa. A lot of people have been deported. A lot of people, Sierra Leone, Nigeria, and Ghana.
Wow.
And there are a lot of Africans who have been treated the same way as Caribbean people, and there've been no attempts or effort at all to even bring them back or even make the effort to say you're entitled to compensation. I think it's outrageous. It's actually quite scandalous, and that's my petition as well. That there should be the government, the Foreign Office, and the Home Office should be working with NGOs in Africa to identify people who have been deported and to support them to come back to Britain or to give them compensation. Nothing has been done at all in that respect, at least in the Caribbean, because there's been a lot of noise. And I think that's because the Caribbean community have been putting pressure anyway on Caribbean ambassadors to do something. But what's happening in the community, the Nigerian, Ghanaian, Sierra Leone community? Are they talking to their high commissioners or ambassadors? What's happening with the governments there? They're not doing it. They're not putting pressure on the Home Office or the Foreign Office. So therefore, nothing happens. So again, this is quite important. I think we don't know. The only thing that we do know is in the last 18 months, there have been 2 charter flights where they have deported just under 60 people back to Jamaica. And I was in Jamaica over a year ago, and I met some of the victims, some of those guys that got deported on the first charter flight. And when you are deported, it works on the basis that you're deported because you're not a British citizen, and therefore, as far as they're concerned, you're stateless. And when you go to Jamaica or whatever, you don't have to register to be a Jamaican citizen, believe it or not, before you can get anything. And also there is a stigma also. So people see you coming from the West. They perceive you've messed up your life. Now you want to come here to our country. There's not much sympathy, ironically and sadly, for people who are deportees. There have been cases of people being murdered, and lots of the deportees can't get jobs because they have a criminal record. The very fact that you might be deported is seen as the criminal record, and therefore when you try and get a job, and if you say I'm a deportee, you're like pariah. They don't want to touch you at all, and the government has not provided any support or assistance whatsoever. It's outrageous. It really is outrageous, and we're not fighting hard enough. At least in some countries, they've refused these deportation flights, and so that's an issue itself. In terms of going back to the point around the compensation scheme, the compensation scheme is not just simply for victims of the Windrush Scandal, I believe, and it's not written down, I've been campaigning for this, that when we had the 1981 Immigration Act, and I can remember this very well because my parents, they got naturalised, and because they were told by the government, if you did not naturalise, you might be threatened with deportation. So my parents naturalised. Hundreds of thousands of Caribbean people, African people, naturalised. That was wrong. We should have not got naturalised in the first place, because they were already British. But we were told that we weren't British, so people paid their money, and I think people should get compensation for applying for naturalisation back in the 1980s. That's my personal opinion.
Mm.
If you were to compare it to, okay, it's not the same scale as the Holocaust, but if you were to compare it around reparations or restorative justice, the principles about righting the wrongs, the government should be giving money to the victims of the Windrush Scandal and their children without saying, here's a fixed amount of money that we will give you. And I've suggested that everyone should get a minimum of £10,000 minimum, and then they could claim additional for compensation. They should be looking at the black community in the UK as part of this restorative justice, because the impact of the Windrush Scandal has traumatized all of us. The question that we all say to ourselves: are we really British? Do they really want us? Are we really valued? That is the impact of the hostile environment. It's had an impact on all of us, not simply just the victims who've been threatened with deportation. It has an impact on that, and that's why the whole stuff around Black Lives Matter is important. Windrush Lives Matter, Black Lives Matter, and that's really important as well. And I think the final thing to add to that is that it has an impact on people's mental health. My background is health and social care. A majority of the victims of the Windrush Scandal are traumatised. They're all experiencing post-traumatic stress. The NHS is not geared up to. There's no offers to help them around counselling. Nothing at all. It's just outrageous. It's almost like we've been left hung dry.
Thank you for that, Patrick. That's really powerful. In addition to the petition, is there a letter that people can write to bombard their local MP with to keep the matter live? That was a question given by an anonymous attendee.
I think there've been a number of organisations that have drafted various letters. Currently, the Equality Human Rights Commission, they are challenging the government on the hostile environment, and they have launched a survey to get people's views and opinions. So if you go into the Equality Human Rights Commission's website, you can see information about their plan to challenge the government on the hostile environment. That was one of the recommendations that was made by Wendy Williams in Lesson Learned Review, that there has to be a review of the hostile environment policy. And I think making submissions to the Equality Human Rights Commission to support in the concept of the Windrush Scandal and hostile environment is important. And I think just contact your MP anyway. Just contact your MP and say, either go to their surgeries or drop them an email, and to say, what are you doing to advocate and to represent the victims of the Windrush Scandal, basically. Or even better, you can do a Google search on Hansard and see what they've said in Parliament or done. But I think you should contact your local MP. I think that the compensation scheme is really, really critical. We need to get that right. And I'm not quite sure whether if I give the link to yourself or Richard afterwards, and then you can share that with everyone if that's easier. Or I could do the link. I can share the link now, which is a bit easier. I can go to.
That'd be great if you could share the link. That would be great. We can do both and share the link and put it someplace where people can have access to it. That'd be great.
Yeah. And also, there's lots of organisations campaigning generally for years on hostile environments, such as Joint Council Welfare for Immigrants, Migrant Rights Network, Praxis. There's a whole range of organisations doing. There's quite a few lawyers who work closely with Jacqueline McKenzie. She's a black solicitor based in Streatham, and she's been supporting lots of victims. Black Culture Archives, I'm working with the Black Culture Archives on a number of events around, and they've been organising surgeries for the last couple of years as well. But I think churches could do that as well.
Thank you for mentioning the Black Cultural Archives, because at the beginning of your talk, you spoke quite passionately about the importance of knowing our multi-ethnic history and the contribution of people from Africa and the Caribbeans and East and South Asia. Why? Clearly it is important, but could you share why you think it's particularly important in this British context?
It's very simple. We have contributed through blood, sweat and tears for 400 years, literally. And also, you know, I mean, I've got a book coming out in September, which I've written with a colleague, Dr. Angelina Osborne. It's called 100 Great Black Britons. It's based on the website I did 17 years ago called 100 Great Black Britons, but now it's going to be a book format, but it's updated with, and that book is celebrating literally 2,000 years of Black British history, of people who have contributed, made a difference as Black people of African descent in Britain. And we've profiled, we'll be announcing 100 people who have made a difference, updated the campaign that we did 17 years ago. And, you know, and the book itself is about, and the reason why we've done that book is about that we have contributed to Britain. But sometimes the way that the media portrays as if we're still scroungers and we're lucky to be here and we should be grateful. Oh no, I don't think so. We've influenced Britain in so many ways, and that's important. It's important for us. It's important for our children, our grandchildren. It's important for white people to understand that we are here. We ain't going nowhere else. This is our country. So get used to it, live with it. And I think thirdly and more importantly, it's about validation of our lived experiences. Really important. We are, you know, the whole stuff around everyday racism, that it's like a cancer that attacks all of us, our people of colour, every single day. Stuff that undermines our confidence in our ability at work, at school, whatever it is. It's corrosive. And sometimes we have to say, you know what, we are proud of what we've achieved. Whatever it's big or small, that's important. It gives us our sanity. I've worked in mental health for many years. There is no coincidence why there's a massive overrepresentation of Black people in mental health services. We're the lucky ones. Maybe we're able to have the coping strategies to deal with everyday racism, but not everyone can deal with that. And that's why there's a massive overrepresentation of us in the mental health system, because those people who've been caught in the mental health system have the cancer of racism and discrimination. Well, obviously, there's other factors as well, which people have mental problems, but one of the key factors is the impact of racism and discrimination. When I've worked in public health policy, we don't talk about that. We don't even talk about the impact of racism and discrimination on the physiology of your body and on your mind. It's only recently, because of COVID-19, there's now a bit of a debate about this issue around structural racism and COVID-19 and how it's discriminating more, and as well as more deaths. You know, but the impact of racism is important. So hold on to our history, be proud of who we are, keeps us sane. It really, you know, it's like it could be a matter of life and death.
Wow, that's really, yeah, that's really important. So your book is called 100
Great Black Britons. It's coming out in September. It's been published by Hachette. It's going to be a profitable book. So it's a good filler for Black History Month and for Christmas.
Well, no, great for Black History Month, because one of the things that I've noticed with Black History Month is that we tend to focus on a lot of American Black notables, when we have a treasure trove of history right here in this country. So that's something that folk, you know, teachers in the audience, church leaders in the audience, community workers in the audience might be a great resource. Doing something constructive in Black History Month that is distinctly British and about our contribution to this country. So that's brilliant. As there are quite a number of all right, so sorry, someone has asked what the name of the book is. Can you repeat it again?
Nice. Yeah, it's called 100 Great Black Britons.
Right.
And you can order it now. You can order it on Amazon. It's there. You can actually, it's quite cheap actually. Don't mind the so it's not made any royalties yet. Anyway, but anyway, it's on Amazon, so you can order it. You can order it, and it's coming out in September. Basically, it's been published by Hacknet.
So a great Christmas gift for someone that you love, people. There you go. We do your Christmas shopping for you here as well. Before we round up, I'm very aware that there are so many threads to this story, and they trickle into so many aspects of our lives. If somebody is not a campaigner, such as yourself, what are the other things that people can get involved with that actually serves to kind of pull the lever and move things on where they are in their own circumstances?
Well, I think there's lots of things people can do. I suppose, what I've done, I've gone, yes, I'm a campaigner, and I suppose I've dedicated a lot of my time doing that. So I'm not expecting everyone to do what I'm doing. It's a very lonely journey. It's very hard work, and sometimes people don't appreciate what you do until they see the outcome of your efforts. So it is very hard, it's very lonely. But I think the simple things that people can do, just read upon your history, just to go to events. There might be local community projects or events who are struggling. Can you help them raise money for them? Can you support them in different ways? There is a fantastic amount of stuff happening in the community, just go out there and see what's happening and support people, local causes. There are loads of local causes out there. Or if you feel that's something that you feel strongly about, then maybe you decide, right, I'm going to set up my own campaign or initiative. I've been doing lots of workshops on how to be a campaigner. Maybe a church together can commission me. I'm very happy to run a workshop on how to be a campaigner.
We have a really good question here from David Forbes. Welcome, David. Lovely to have you. And he asked, how can you deal with the phenomenon of backlash from white communities?
Oh, it's hard. I'm getting it now. So I'm from Wolverhampton, and people know the West Midlands or Wolverhampton, Dudley, Tipton, Sedgley, Walsall. That's part of the Black Country. It's always seen itself as the heart of the Industrial Revolution. That's what we were taught at school. Steam canal, steam engines, coal mining, smelting, ironworks, and that kind of stuff. And about 5 years ago, some local people, launched a campaign called Black Country Day to celebrate the industrial heritage, working class history, industrial heritage. That's fine, nothing wrong with that. And they had a school competition, and they got a young girl to design a logo, but based on the design brief of the organisers. And at the heart of this logo is a chain motif. And I brought to the attention of the organisers that, do you realise during the height of slavery, the Black Country, with all your furnaces, you had the real monopoly on making fetters, handcuffs, neck chains, padlocks, all the chains that you see on slave ships and on plantations in America and the Caribbean were all made in the Black Country. And I said to them, that is insensitive. I didn't use the R word. I said it was insensitive and not appropriate. It's almost like equivalent to a swastika or Confederate flag. And guess what happens? I got hate mail. I got trolled on Twitter. The local newspaper in the Star in Wolverhampton ran a campaign against me, saying, how dare I raise this issue of race, of slave, the Black Country flag's got nothing to do with the slave trade. I'm making it up. And actually, by the way, you got OBE, you should apologise and give back your OBE. You don't deserve it, basically. I've got hate mail, I've got trolls on Twitter. They even ran an opinion poll online to say, should Patrick Vernon come back to Wolverhampton? I'm not joking. It was nasty and vicious.
Wow.
And because all I see, I was being very polite. I said, do you realise that the slave trade financed the Industrial Revolution? And on top of that, you had guys in the West Midlands, the Black Country, these manufacturers making chains. And to make it matters worse, some of those chain manufacturers had plantations in the Caribbean, And to add insult to injury, they even got compensation in 1833. So I brought all this to, and I said to them, I'm not making it up, go into the archives, I've seen it. It's in the Wolverhampton archives, they've got records, they've got details there, but people don't want to listen to that stuff. All they personalise it, and there's, oh, you know, and I said, I'm causing division. Anyway, so every year in July, they have Black Country Day, and obviously my name always comes up, so I'll get hate mail. So this year, they had Black Country Day a few days ago, and what happened with the fire service in the West Midlands have decided not to use the flag. So again, they say, oh, it's all my fault. It's all Patrick because I should have kept them up. And organisers said to me, Patrick, they now acknowledged that there's a link between the slave trade and chains, but they said that the working class people had a hard time working in the furnaces and factories. So what you want to tell me? You're trying to tell me that people who worked in the factories had a harder time compared to all the millions that died in the Middle Passage that got enslaved in the plantations. Their time was harder than our time. So this is a big issue around, I mean, the whole stuff around Black Lives Matter and the removal of Colston statue has opened up this whole debate around what is history, what should we celebrate, and what should go. And, you know, so when you raise these issues, you get attacked. And that scares a lot of people. I mean, Diane Abbott is the most hated woman on social media. There's a lot of research work's been done that she, about a third of all hate tweets are directed at her.
Wow.
It's horrible. When you're a black person, a black man and woman, and you're raising these issues of race, discrimination, you get the amount of hate mails unbelievable on social media and threat. I mean, Dawn Butler had to close her constituent office just last week because she was getting her staff were getting death threats and stuff like that. And this is the burden that we have to carry if we want to raise the issues.
Thank you. Thank you. And sobering words, that this is a long journey and not an easy journey. And sadly, this part of the journey is at an end. Thank you for everyone who has participated. Thank you for those of you who have tuned in at the end of a long day. We have a lot to think about, and hopefully this conversation will continue in your homes and in your churches and with your work colleagues and members of your family. Do sign a petition, find other ways of getting involved. Patrick has given us a list of things we could be getting on with. But on behalf of CTBI and Baptist Union of Great Britain, Patrick just wants to say thank you so much for stimulating us and challenging us, and so that we have a better idea of what we need to be doing. And Rosemary Mallett said at the very beginning, before we started, just to let you know that we give thanks for your relentless work on behalf of the Caribbean community. And I'm sure people on this web page watching this and up and down the country would say a resounding amen. Thank you, Patrick, and God bless.
Thanks very much. Thank you.